Now, education usually takes a big chunk of the country's budget, and with COVID-19 wreaking havoc on learning, the sector's needs are even greater. Now, this will be a key focus area for Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. My colleague Gareth Edwards is at the JSE, and Gareth, I understand you've got UJ, Professor and former Gauteng Education MEC, Professor Metcalfe, with you to have this conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it's a wonderful way of introducing the professor. Let's not forget as well, MEC as well, very, very involved in the world of education. Let's not waste time, because I know, Prof. Metcalfe, good to have you with us. And not have you on Zoom. It's actually nice to have you in person this morning. So talk to me then, Prof. It's a big budget, and there's what we call an education budget. But it's not a separate thing, is it? What are you hoping for today?
Well, it's a very important starting point, because in terms of education, we're not going to get any detail today. The detail will come in the education budget speech of the Minister of Basic Education and the Minister of Higher Education. But it's important to look at the signs. And what are the signs? The signs, firstly, are what was said in the budget speech last year. Now, if I stay with the budget speech of last year, the budget speech that we'll get today will be similar to last year's in terms of its structure. It will talk about broad fiscal policy. Now, one of the important things about last year's budget speech, which does have implications for education, is that the fiscal strategy is to stabilize our debt. That is very important, because the current spending on debt is 75% of what we spend on education. The more that we increase our debt, the less money will be available for social services. So if you look at the education budget, both higher education and basic education, it's 23% of our spend, our before interest spending. So education is huge, it's a priority. The Minister of Finance said last year we want to stabilize, which means there's danger signs in terms of, are we necessarily going to get more?
Right.
Now, that also links to the medium-term budget statement, which is like a mid-year review of how we're doing. And interestingly, in last year's medium-term budget statement, the new Minister of Finance was very clear that he's worried about education because we are not keeping up with our norms and standards infrastructure.
How far back on the norms and standards are we? Like, if you had to give it as a scale, maybe are we 2-3 years behind? Are we a decade behind? Are we an education generation behind? How worried are you?
I'm sorry to be pessimistic, but I would say that it's at least 10 years behind.
Generational almost.
We are a generation, and that also shows how you connect the dots. Because the President said in his State of the Nation that there needs to be, and there is being established, a special purpose vehicle for assisting the state to deliver on infrastructure, which signals that there's two issues. One is finance and the other is capacity. So the President in his speech also doesn't go into detail about education in his State of the Nation. There are several things that he focused on. One is the infrastructure delivery. Medium-term budget statement has said there's challenges around financing, but there's also the impact of COVID.
Absolutely.
And COVID expenditure has really dented the education budgets, and the medium-term budget statement indicated they were worried. The Minister of Finance was worried about the fact that provinces are reducing expenditure on teachers because they have to cope with a COVID expenditure.
Because even pre-COVID, Prof, tell me if you agree, education wasn't getting the attention and the money it needed. And then we brought in COVID-19. Well, we didn't bring it in. COVID-19 landed, and it's even worse. So you were talking a moment ago about how it could be a generational problem that has to be fixed. How much worse has COVID made that?
It definitely has made it worse. And by the way, and I'll come to that, but when we talk about the challenges generationally in infrastructure, it's worse in some parts of the country than others. It's very clear to me that it is those parts of the country which were historically Bantustans on the whole, which are worse for obvious reasons. So if you look at the infrastructure map, it maps the old Bantustans. It also can be very bad in rapidly urbanizing parts of the country, not only provincially but also in terms of urban centers, where the demand for new schooling because of new families coming to an area outstrips demand. Now, why does it link to COVID? Is because when we had to start buying PPEs and delivering water and sanitation, there wasn't new money that dropped from heaven for that.
That's right.
It had to be taken from somewhere, and it in fact was taken from the infrastructure budget.
Prof, before I start saying goodbye to you, you're quite right. In today's budget, it's just setting that framework, I think is the term you use. That's the education budget we're going to look out for. Is there a key word that I need to listen out for, that you're going to listen out for today, that'll give an indication?
I would definitely look for school infrastructure, because it's been highlighted by both the President and in the medium-term budget statement. I would look for youth employment, because that is a major issue, and the youth employment scheme, the basic education employment scheme, are both very important in terms of providing support to schools with young people who have not yet been able to find work, gives them hope, gives them a sense of purpose. In terms of higher education, the medium-term budget statement gave an indication that we would be receiving a report on financing of higher education to the Presidency in November. I'm not sure if that was delivered. Financing higher education, school infrastructure, maintaining the number of teachers that we need, and the youth employment initiatives.
Prof, I always appreciate you taking time to speak to us. Good luck and enjoy the budget speech. Hopefully we hear the words that you were hoping to hear. Professor Mary Metcalfe, education specialist, a number of key issues. The big word, though, is education infrastructure. Looking out for that, 2 o'clock this afternoon.